A major moment in Canadian history.
Last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today.
The Prime Minister, who's long resisted calls to resign, now says he'll step down.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader.
Justin Trudeau addressing the nation from outside his home at Rideau Cottage, repeatedly describing himself as a fighter.
Every bone in my body has always told me to fight because I care deeply about Canadians.
But staying on as a leader is a fight he couldn't win.
It has become obvious to me with the internal battles that I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
Those internal battles bruising and relentless, growing calls from his own MPs to resign only intensifying after last month's stunning resignation of his Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland.
Despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralysed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history.
Trudeau said it took the holidays and long talks with his family to come to this decision.
Removing me from the equation as the leader who will fight the next election for the Liberal Party should also decrease the level of polarization that we're seeing right now in the House.
He's now calling for a reset. The Governor-General has approved his request to prorogue Parliament, putting government business on hold until the end of March, while his party holds a competitive race for its next leader. Freeland, former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, former BC Premier Christy Clark, and several cabinet ministers among those viewed as possible contenders.
We have to go in elections.
But opposition parties are vowing to try and bring down the government with non-confidence votes after that.
New Democrats will be voting against this government for an election where Canadians will have a choice.
They want to protect their pensions and paycheck by sweeping their hated leader under the rug months before an election to trick you and then do it all over again.
The Liberals hope Trudeau's departure changes everything and can rescue the party from some of the worst polling it's seen since Trudeau became Liberal leader more than a decade ago and before Canadians head to the polls sometime this year. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
There's little surprise in BC reaction to Justin Trudeau's decision to step down as Prime Minister.
That sounds like a good idea, Justin.
That's good news, I think, for all of us.
I think it's something we've all been waiting for.
It's been clear for a while that without change, the Liberals could have been trounced in BC in the next federal election.
I think British Columbians, as well as most Canadians, had tired of Justin Trudeau and wanted him to step down.
At least one member of Trudeau's BC caucus said the Prime Minister had become detached from the sentiments of everyday Canadians.
I could see things that weren't happening as well as they should have, or things that we missed doing. And I think that those are probably the nature of the disconnect that I was talking about.
Many British Columbians who voted for Trudeau in the past say they had no similar plan for the future.
I think he did a great job during COVID, but he can't rest on that laurels, and he hasn't done a whole lot in the last 2 or 3 years.
And let somebody else take over the party if they have any hope at all of continuing on.
I think we need to just a change overall.
BC Premier David Eby took to social media with a message. While we didn't always agree, I want to thank Justin Trudeau for serving as Prime Minister during some very difficult times our country has faced. With the Canadian government effectively in caretaker mode, many voters are focused on what comes next.
If he had made this decision much earlier, the Liberals would have a better chance of reorganizing.
If Chrystia Freeland was voted in as the Liberal leader, I would vote Chrystia Freeland.
BC names are among those circulating as potential candidates for the Liberal leadership. Jonathan Wilkinson from North Vancouver is on that list.
I am actively considering it. I haven't made that decision yet, but I will need to make it obviously pretty soon.
So is former BC Premier Christy Clark. Trudeau's resignation has put her squarely back in the political spotlight. Last fall, Clark publicly expressed interest in leading the federal Liberal Party, but noted at the time the job wasn't open. Now that it is, Clark wrote on social media, This is the biggest opportunity in over a decade that we've had to grow our party and welcome new Liberals. Let's seize it. Political experts say what happens next depends entirely on who replaces Justin Trudeau and if that reignites any enthusiasm for federal Liberals in British Columbia. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
Returning now to our top story, Justin Trudeau has announced after 9 years as Prime Minister and growing calls to leave that he is now ready to resign. Trudeau says he will stay on until a new Liberal leader is chosen. So what comes next? For some insights into that, we turn to Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute and also one of the busiest people today across the country. It's been a long day. It's been a while. Safe to say, and you had some polling on this when we last spoke, Justin Trudeau is not leaving on a high note at this point.
No, he's not. He's leaving on his personal lowest note. His approval had sunk to a nadir of 22% in terms of approval, and that was an all-time low for him. Important to remember, it's not like the all-time lowest of lows. Pretty sure Brian Mulroney had worse numbers than him when he left, but it wasn't trending in a good direction. Not by a long shot. I think more concerning for Liberals, for the Prime Minister, for his caucus, for fundraisers, donors, that white-knuckle moment was really the fact that the absolute floor in terms of vote intent was down to 13%, which if that had held, would have resulted basically in one of the worst showings for the party in modern history. So when I looked at that data in and around New Year's Eve and just before we put it out, it was like, oh, yeah, this isn't good for the Prime Minister.
No, and obviously for the party as well. This does spark a leadership race. What do we know about, in terms of data that you've collected, public perception on some of the big candidates? We think about Chrystia Freeland, Dominic LeBlanc, Christy Clark here in BC, among other names.
So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. First of all, from a name recognition factor, people like Freeland and Carney are going to have a bit of a head start on that. But there are other candidates such as Clark who may have a bit of a head start around organizing and sort of doing the mechanics of signing up members or trying to build support, right? Trying to do the operational work in that. One of the things that I think is really key here is that you've got potential successors who can lift the party up. They can provide some altitude, some loft. They can potentially, if they were to take on the job, they have the potential to boost the party's fortunes. But based on what we're seeing, it's not enough to really be in a contention space with the federal Conservatives, who are polling at something 40+% right now.
And that's been consistent over a number of months, hasn't it?
It has been, and just been sort of ticking up over time. So if you're somebody who's trying to get some momentum going for a newly revitalized Liberal Party, yes, you might inject 8, 10, 12, 20% enthusiasm into vote intent for the party. But what you have to do is actually be in a place where you can go head-to-head with Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives and actually surge through. That, in a 4-month period, is a pretty tall hill to climb. Never say never, but history tells us right now, not looking so likely.
And particularly when they have such an advantage when it comes to fundraising. We've heard about that. Lastly, we appreciate your time. If you're Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, what are you watching for in the coming weeks? And are you changing your strategy because it may have been planned around fighting an election against Justin Trudeau?
My thought is that chances are Conservative strategists had more than one strategy in mind. I think the what if Trudeau steps down factor was always there. I don't think the Conservatives are too worried about, at this moment, too tremendously worried about whoever they'll face. I think the bigger liability for them is a screw up on part of Pierre Poilievre or on part of his caucus, basically just, saying inconvenient and politically unpalatable or unacceptable things. It's really right now about message control and not making unforced errors.
Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute, we always appreciate your time, and we will call you again.
Oh, goody. Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome. Thank you.